Chapter 11, Fathers. Before my mother died of cancer, a thin-haired and fragile shadow of the beauty she once had been, she inexplicably opened up to Bev over tea one afternoon. As she talked, she unraveled many of the mysteries that had bound up my past for years. She talked about my biological father, how she felt about him, how she fled the factory when she learned she was pregnant. Some of the details, difficult to swallow, are not confirmable. Their veracity will never be known. Mom at the end was an apologetic, defeated woman. She had given her life back to the Lord years before. She had moved into a cottage on the campgrounds at Brayside. She had encouraged her children in their various ministries, but she never entirely outdistanced her guilt. "Maury, I made such a mess of my life," she whimpered so often when I talked to her privately. I drove home the message of forgiveness again and again to her, reminding her how the blood of Jesus Christ cleanses us from all sin. But to no avail. She could never stop fleeing entirely. She ran from her past until she died. It was only after the funeral, as I stood at the grave and watched the coffin lowered into the earth, that I felt a particular freedom. The freedom to search for my biological father. Bev had encouraged me in it, and my interest in the mission grew over the years. But I knew what deep hurts it could cause among the members of my family, and for Mom especially, so I had moved very slowly and carefully. I never felt anger toward the mystery man whose chromosomes I carried in my body. I had known too little of him. I had been introduced to him through too complicated a maze of untruths and half-truths over too great a span of time. At no intersection in my life did I ever get a full report or comprehensive description of the original Maury Blair. Was he a war hero? It became clear years later that he was not, although he may have had a military background that gave him impetus to my mother's far-fetched lie. But did he die in the World War? What we eventually determined to be untrue altogether. Who visited the London hospital during my stay there as an infant and signed in as Maury Blair? Had the original Maury Blair surfaced for some unknown reason? Or was it someone else using my name as Mother had supplied? My mother never provided an answer. The answer can probably never be known. Bev and I began to pursue the mystery father even before Mom died, and Bev's artful questioning of my mother produced the detail that Maury Blair had gravitated from Flint to Fort Wayne, Indiana. Bev called Fort Wayne operator and asked if there was a listing for Maury Blair. "No," the operator replied, "but we have a Maurice Blair." Bev placed a person-to-person call to the number in the Fort Wayne and asked the operator to ask for Maury Blair instead of Maurice. I listened on an extension phone as a man answered. "Yes, this is Maury Blair." It was a weird sensation to hear my own voice on the other end of the line, but the match was undeniable. Bev asked him if he were the Maury Blair who lived and worked in Flint, Michigan in 1937 at Irving Machine Parts. "Yes, I'm that same Maury Blair." Bev explained that her husband was a minister with the same name who was trying to locate his real father, and that the search had led right to him. "Are you the right man?" Bev asked, eagerly, sure that he was. There was a moment of silence, then the tense response, "No, I don't think so." Bev bit her lip. She realized too late that she had told too much too soon, and now she had few options. She cut the conversation short. "All right, thank you," and hung up. We held a hurried, nervous conference. We had burst the bubble now. In the drama of encountering my biological father for the first time in any fashion, we were not sure what to do next. Set it all aside and forget it? Pursue him? Try to meet him? And what had he done to the man himself? Was he standing at the phone in Fort Wayne in tears? In fear? Did he expect us to blackmail him? What did his family know about the Alice Wick of so many summers ago? We decided that I should call him back. When I introduced myself on the phone, he asked me to wait a moment. I heard him put the phone down, then I heard a door close. Then he picked up the phone again. I explained my story to him, gingerly avoiding any suggesting of an accusation that would put him on the defensive. This, I figured, could be my last shot. After this conversation, he could change his phone number, move to a different city, alter his identity, or lose me forever by any one of the numerous other methods. But he was too intrigued, as I would have been in his shoes, to let the opportunity pass. And he asked me question after question about my work, my family, my situation in life. He never admitted to fathering me, never made any reference that could be so construed, but his interest in me was fatherly, and intensely so. At the end of the conversation, we agreed that I should call him again sometime in the future and talk further. As I hung up, I realized I was breathless. The one long-distance encounter satisfied me for a long time. Life went on. Our work continued. The ministry commanded our attention month after month with few let-ups. But the seed of the unknown had taken root. And the next autumn, Bev and I were driving home from a conference in Missouri when we decided to stop in Fort Wayne. A phone book in the public phone booth told us the address of Maury Blair. Nervously, we drove by the place, and grasping at the moment for posterity, took pictures of the house. At the nearest corner, we parked the car and prayed that he would walk out the front door so I could just see him without the trauma of knocking on his door. But the impulse seized me as I waited. I jumped out of the car and walked to the door and rang the bell. If anyone else came to the door, I would ask for directions to some imaginary address. I read the name on the front door, Maurice D. Blair. When he swung the door open, I had the odd sensation all over again of meeting myself. Except that here now, it was face to face with all the complicated nuances of the visual. He was some 30, perhaps 35 years older than I, taller and broader, and yet in other respects virtually identical to me. The effect was so startling that we were both stunned, unable to speak or move for an endless moment. Here gazed the child of woe into his father's eyes, and the accidental father into the face of his unknown son. I was more part of him than he was of the woman he had slept with to conceive me, and yet we had never met, never touched. He had left me behind, unwittingly, in my mother's womb. Now in this moment of rare truth, the wild oat had come back to haunt its sower. As I stood transfixed, I heard voices in the background of the house. I knew better than to introduce myself by name, but he didn't know that yet. I could read his mind as I watched his eyes. He knew I could ruin him with a word, a phrase, in a matter of seconds. Behind those eyes, so like my own, he was masking the terror of exposure. I ached to tell him who I was, to resolve the question that would linger forever if I didn't. Were we truly father and son? I knew by all logic there could be no other explanation for the multitude of coincidences that converged our lives at this point. But still, to sit and talk with him, to explore, to fill in the innumerable gaps, would have somehow completed my earthly self. Instead, as I saw the fear in his face, I mumbled a request for directions to some fabricated address. The question was probably incoherent, but little matter. He mumbled in reply that he could not help me, and that was probably true in several different ways. I told him I would try further down the street, and I turned to walk toward the car. I did not turn around, but Bev viewed everything from the parking place. She saw the man step out onto the veranda and watch us until we were out of sight. The rest of the drive to Canada was accomplished in silence. I was numb. There was no way to take the kind of event it had been and put it immediately into sentences and paragraphs of conversation. After 35 years on this earth, I had confronted the man who had given me life, and for the moment, the encounter had drawn the life out of me. I did not have the heart to pursue him. Each time over the space of the following months that I came to the point of picking up the telephone, I could only see his terrified face, looking perhaps like a grown-up version of my own face in the days of facing Cyrus. So it was a full year before I finally placed the call. It was a cordial talk, a short conversation in which I suggested that we could have coffee together sometime when I was in Fort Wayne. He agreed pleasantly, and we hung up. I did not mention the incident at the door. I thought we could talk about that in person. We never talked again. In the next year, he died of a heart attack. Later, I tracked down Maurice D. Blair's younger brother and discovered through him that I had half-brothers and half-sisters living in Fort Wayne. But for me, the quest was largely over, only for the record books, only for the satisfaction of human fancy and inquisitiveness had I searched up my father at all. Completeness for me never hinged on discovering the source of my genetics. Completeness for me had occurred in that squalid little house in Paris, Ontario, years before, as I thumbed the pages of a borrowed book in my lonely upstairs bedroom. Completeness for me had been watching me and loving me all along. God had never been confused about my bloodline. Before I formed thee in the belly, he declared through Jeremiah 1 verse 5, I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee. My earthly bloodline never restricted him. He would provide a new bloodline anyway. In those marvelous moments, as he revealed himself to me, I became the person I was destined to be. Scandalous heritage notwithstanding. Once the child of woe, I became instantly a child of the King. The agonies of my youth remained vivid in my memory, although my father healed the pain. The victimization of the innocent, like the suffering of the saints, can never be fully explained in this life. Even godly Job may have only suffered his personal horror for the benefit of those of us who could read this account and learn from it centuries later. I was fortunate. God gave me a work in which I could trade my own troubled past for the helping of others later on. In my ministry, I have been privileged to work with hundreds and hundreds of people who needed the counsel of a person who'd been there, a person who had faced his own Cyrus Wick. God has given me the opportunity to speak at youth camps, Christian businessmen's conventions, rock festivals, even overseas. Most recently, I've been able to establish a nationwide evangelism ministry called Breakthrough, which includes counseling for troubled youth, a 24-hour helpline, street witnessing, kids clubs, radio outreach, and a breakthrough band. In these satisfying ways and more, the Heavenly Father has redeemed the lost years for me many times over by giving me the opportunity of declaring the phenomena of His loving power. If He could rescue me from that hopelessness, He can rescue anybody from anything.